We're rolling.
Okay.
Okay.
So, start with your first question.
The first question again had to do with the you're back in Paris. The Germans are occupying northern and western France.
Mm-hmm.
Your father is making a living.
Mm-hmm.
You're living in the same apartment.
Mm-hmm.
The worst event in 1940 for you was that your mother died.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, it was personally the worst event, but it certainly is part and parcel of the debacle, and it's part and parcel of my life. I mean, I cannot separate one from the other.
Right.
The war, but after, as mentioned, after my mother died, just life goes on. You have a period of mourning, of course, but you still have to take care of the exigencies of life. So, you just go on.
And you were attending school, your brother was attending school.
And my sister was attending school, yes. And
your father worked Monday through Friday?
Yes, pretty much, even on Saturday, if he had to call on a customer on Saturday.
And so the routine in the apartment was, you said yesterday your brother was a very early riser, and he'd study, and if you'd burn the midnight oil to finish homework.
Usually, because I left an important assignment to the very last minute, and so I'd have to write it in a hurry the night before it was due.
But brilliantly so, I'm sure.
Well, I'm not sure, honey, but the fact is that Dora will say to this day that I used to keep her up while I was trying to finish my homework, because we shared a bedroom.
And I'm sure you just would whisper at her, hiss at her, saying, "Go to sleep."
And if you say anything, I'll knock your teeth. Probably something to that effect.
Threats work wonderfully.
Yes, absolutely, especially with younger sisters. When you're 3 years older, that may not necessarily convey a great deal of authority in other people's eyes, but in a pecking order, 3 years is very important.
It's and Nathan was 18 months older than you.
Yes. And not quite 18 months. He was born in March, I was born in November. He was born in 25, I was born in 26.
Did he push you around?
No, he was very gentle soul, no. But my sister and he used to make common cause. I mean, let's say that if they had a common enemy, I was it.
Because you were the pushy. I think you characterized yourself as a Jewish princess.
Yes, in fact, yes, very much so. And I have absolutely no quibble with my sister thinking I was a brat, because I was.
You talked yesterday about the opera, the videotape of you at the opera, and you said there's a photo of you with a white beret standing on the steps of the opera?
No, that's not it. That was at Evian-les-Bains. That was where my mother, before she went to Saint-Nectaire, which was what the French call station balnéaire, or balnéaire means bath, where people go for the waters, and some of it involves physical therapy and, waters with certain properties, or drinking the waters, And before she started going to Saint-Nectaire, she used to go to Evian, where the waters of Evian were supposed to have a property beneficial to her health. It turned out many years later it was found out that the bottled water of Evian, which is sold to this day, was strictly lake water. There was a huge scandal, as I recall. But anyway, the picture that you recall, I was not 6 yet. I was almost 6. It was taken the 6th of September, 1932. Because there's my mother's handwriting in the back with the date.
And is that the only photo of you as a child?
Yes, yes. And I was the one she took with her.
Oh, so she left the other two?
Yes. And I don't know where the other two were, whether they were in Paris or out in the country with somebody I really don't know. But I was the only one there with her.
Did you travel much with you? Did your parents travel much? Did you travel much with them?
No, no. Except for Grand Vacances, vacation, and that was strictly going from Paris to wherever we were going to spend the first half of our vacation. As I mentioned to you, the cure, the prescribed length for the stay at the spa was something like 6 weeks, I think.
Now, this was for your mother?
Yes, and so we'd go there for 6 weeks and then spend the other half of Grand Vacances, summer vacation, at some country retreat that my father would rent various places for the summer. So
you mentioned yesterday that both you and Nathan had spent a lot of time in your childhood at sanitarium.
Yes, well, he did at any rate. I spent some time because he had curvature of the spine, scoliosis, la scoliose, in fact, that's what they call it in France. And he was in a cast, and
he was in a cast.
Yes, for a year, and then exercise, and I had some lung problem, and so I recall that the total of my grade school years amounted to 3 years.
Out of 6?
Out of 6, yes. And I think my brother probably about the same. And as a matter of fact, he was, when he was getting ready for the exams for the Grande École, École des Mines, or École des Ponts et Chaussées, he was only 16 years old. He really, he had really what the French call mettre les bouchées doubles, accelerated the pace, and even though he had not had a full grade school career, at 16 he was in première, which is the last grade of, in fact I think he might have been in Mathilène. Anyway, he was way ahead in terms of, well, he should be at the age of 16. He was way ahead. So he had caught up whatever had been lacking, the number of years that he had lacked in his grade school had more than been made up at the pace he set in high school, at the lycée.
Did your parents give all of you just free rein in terms of what you wanted to study? Well, I know in French it's...
you don't really have that much choice, but definitely my brother was the mathematician, I was the linguist, and my sister equally, so also. So generally it was the parents who made the decisions for you. But my parents were not tyrannical in the least, so if I had said I wanted to take German instead of English, it was an option, they certainly wouldn't have said no.
Who was the disciplinarian in the family?
Neither.
No, I remember years ago you told the story of your mother, there was a cat of 9 tails.
Oh yes,
for discipline.
Oh, no, that was strictly for show,
Oh, for sure?
Yes.
And your brother sabotaged it?
Yes, yeah, he cut the thongs and he flushed them down the toilet.
Was this after a threatened?
Probably,
yeah.
Probably. But that was called a martinet.
And
every mother had one, and you brandished it, the way here women would brandish a hairbrush. And if you don't behave, you're going to get 3 whacks of that, And I mean, it was strictly, it was a normal part of the household, but it was never used. It was for show, Be careful because.
And Nathan decided to nip
he
this
put
in the
an
bud.
end to that one, and it was never replaced after that. No, my parents were not strict disciplinarians, but there was a what should I say? I don't want to call it modus vivendi, but there were certain things that were expected of you as a child, and it never occurred to us to act any differently.
What was the relationship of the two of them? Was it affectionate?
Yes, very much so. My mother was very much in love with her, yes.
And your parents, your dad was born in 1900, your mom would have been born in 1901. And so they emigrated to Paris in 1925. Nathan was born in 1924?
No, he was born in 1925. I think they emigrated that same year.
That same year. Do you know how long they'd been married before that?
Yes, they had a child, the firstborn, Giselle, who died of scarlet fever before my brother was born. So they were married, I believe, in 1921.
Because I knew you'd mentioned Giselle before, but I wasn't sure. And your mother had another baby that died in delivery?
Died after delivery.
Died after delivery.
Yes. That was in 1937 or 38, I can't be sure. It was late 30s.
Late 30s.
Yes. Yes.
So this would have been
the doctors were strictly against her carrying that baby to term, but she wouldn't hear of a termination of pregnancy, even in the early stages. She wouldn't have it.
So.
But.
So they were. So
but you know, one thing that I must specify about my father, he was not a stern disciplinarian, but at the dinner table, nobody sat until he came. We stood and waited for him to sit down, then we sat.
Would he be dressed in a tie and a jacket?
Oh yes, definitely, absolutely. And there was proper decorum. It was just part.
If the soup were cold, it was lèse majesté?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was sent back to the kitchen. You know, my father, I think I get that from him, I guess, is that I detest, absolutely abhor anything that's not absolutely piping hot. If it doesn't take the roof of my mouth off, it's not warm enough. So, and he was the same way. So everything, yes, maids were, you know, they were paid the normal current, wages. The maid.
The maid cooks.
Yes. They were called bonnet to faire, which literally means good for all works. In other words, it was a maid of all work. So she cooked, she shopped, did grocery shopping, kept long hours. Maids used to keep long hours. They'd come in at 7 and probably not retire till 9:30. 9:30.
It may be on the first tape, but it might not. You said that you explained that your parents' apartment was on the 4th floor.
Yes.
And the maid lived on the 6th floor.
The maid quarters. Every apartment was allotted 2 maids' rooms in that particular building. Others had 1 maid room. But in that particular building, 2 maids' rooms, and they are usually located on the 6th or 7th floor, directly under the roof. They have a mansard roof and a dormer window, or maybe just a skylight. And they're very Spartan rooms, with a wash basin and bed, etc. But the maids are they're furnished. They're live-in maids, but of course their quarters are separate from the families. And
now your father, I remember you saying once, your father had very strict ideas about how you behaved with respect to dozen service.
Yes, and it was that you always treated people who had to wait on you, always treated them with courtesy, and never threw your position, never took advantage of your position. It would not have done to mistreat or to high-hat a servant. You didn't do that. She called you called her Maria, and she called you Mademoiselle Rachel. But the fact is that she could scold you. And she could tell you, ça ne se fait pas, you don't do that. You accorded her a courteous treatment, even if you didn't like her. you know, and we had maids we didn't like. But you always accorded courteous treatment. Never took advantage of it.
Didn't your dad once have cause to reprimand you or spank you for telling off a maid when you were a young girl?
He probably did. I don't recall.
Because I recall you.
Yeah,
I recall the story
might have met. Yes.
Where he took you aside and he
yes,
gave you a whack, and you
yes,
said, "You never abuse those who can't defend themselves."
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yes, that he would have. You know, that certainly was part of the. That was part of the upbringing.
Yeah.
That definitely was part of the upbringing, and and I can't say that it was that unusual. I mean, it's a normal thing, and you know, in a milieu where you have servants, you treat them courteously and decently.
Well, I suspect it's rarer than it's more honored in the breach than the observance.
Perhaps,
but
perhaps,
still,
perhaps.
so okay. So we're in late 1940. And the household is in mourning, but
yes,
life goes on.
Yeah, life goes on, yes.
And I think I asked you yesterday, again, it might be on that ill-fated tape. At school, you didn't, you only had your teachers, one teacher.
There was absolutely no manifestation of animosity or anything like that.
But in terms of commiseration, I meant for your mother's loss?
No. Well, you were talking at that point. We were talking about after my father was arrested. Now, that's before. We're before my.
Okay.
You know.
Okay. So we got things out of
yes,
sequence. Why don't you take up the story where you want? It is again. It's 1940. One thing that you did want to clarify was the decree that was issued.
Yes, that decree of June 1940, which I couldn't remember, but I think I've clarified it in my mind. I'm fairly certain that it was a decree ordering the registration of Jews.
Mm-hmm.
They had to register. Usually these registrations were done at the police precinct, which we call commissariat police. And you had to go there and register. And I'm quasi certain that this is what this decree was all about.
And you think your father?
I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know where he was not in Paris when Paris fell.
Mm-hmm.
Because Paris fell before the rest of France did.
Mm-hmm. He was in service.
He was in service.
He was in the military.
Yes, and he wouldn't have returned. He joined us, and that would have been. And he joined us after the fall of Moulins, because we were alone. My brother, my sister, and I were alone the night that the Germans invaded.
Alone with your mother.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. And your mother was essentially an invalid by this point.
Yes. Yes.
So in terms of how you survived this house in Moulins, you.
It was a rented house, and we had a day help.
You had day help. Did the day help do the cooking?
Oh yes.
So the day help.
No, in fact, wait a moment. No, it wasn't day help. It was a young maid. Now that I recall, because when my mother took a weekend to go see my father after he'd been called in service, she went to Bourges and she left us with a young maid. And for 3 days, our menu was chocolate mousse. So we did have a living maid there too. Mm-hmm.
Your mother went to see your father. Your father was stationed in
Bourges, which is a cathedral city in near Burgundy. I don't know if it's exactly in Normandy, but if it's not, it's right.
And
yes.
This was before the onslaught of June 1940.
Yes, it was. It was before the Blitzkrieg. It was before the Blitzkrieg started, because once the Germans started that Blitzkrieg, I told you about the invasion of refugees from from Holland, from Belgium, from northern France, everything, and then the trend was reversed when the Germans invaded, and came down after Paris. They came down town after town till they were spread all over the territoire, Then the exodus was reversed. People went back home. There was no longer any reason to stay. And I believe it must still be in the other tape about the columns of refugees being strafed by German what was the name of their planes? Not
Stukas.
Spitfire, Stukas, yes.
Stukas.
And they would dive,
and it was clear that they were attacking civilians.
Absolutely, those were columns of civilians.
And they just did this to sow panic and
to sow absolute panic, and also to help prevent the movement of troops, because as long as there's panic on the roads, troops can't.
Right.
You know, particularly in those days when there weren't really troops were not ferried from place to place on four wheels. They walked. You know, the infantry still walked. So the more chaos on the roads. I mean, this is why there were rumors of a fifth column sowing panic. And rumors, you know, to create panic, to contribute to the complete breakdown of the normal order, you know.
How many miles or kilometers from Moulins to Paris?
I really don't know. If I had to take a guess, I would say 350 miles, perhaps. Maximum. You know, I'm used to thinking over there in terms of kilometers, and kilometers are considerably less than a mile. But it's
500 kilometers?
Yes, perhaps, maybe a little less. I don't really, you know, I don't commit these things to memory, but...
Okay.
Okay, and so...
so you're in Paris, it's January, February of 41. Was the winter cold? Was it wet? Was it...
Well, you know...
was it a light winter, a mild winter?
There's the winter of 40-41, that is, you know, starting in the fall of 40 and carrying over to 41, and...
there was rationing.
There was, yes, of course, that's the first thing that was instituted, was food rationing, clothing rationing, and this evolved, but it ended up, we had days without meat, that is 3 days without meat, and 4 days during which meat could be purchased with coupons, and very strictly rationed. There was categories for food rationing. For instance, infants would get milk. Older children would get much less, if any. Dairy products were strictly rationed. The only thing that was not rationed, potatoes were rationed. The only thing that was not rationed would be green leafy vegetable, or perhaps carrots. But anything that was substantial was rationed. I mean, anything that kept body and soul together without inducing starvation.
Were Jews discriminated in the rations at all?
No, not at that point, no.
And was Paris still, did it have refugees? No, Paris, obviously, the fall of the Low Countries occurred approximately the same time as the fall of...
well, it occurred before, but no, at that point everybody had returned home.
Were there still Spanish refugees?
Oh yes, there were still Spanish refugees. They weren't forced back. They weren't forced back by the Germans. The French, at the end of the Civil War and during the Spanish Civil War, had put a large number of them in detention camps, quasi-concentration camps. But a lot of them had been allowed out little by little. I think perhaps the same thing happened as happened here during the Cuban immigration flight, you know, where some were sent back because they had criminal records, and others were allowed to stay. But the record of France in welcoming Spanish refugees is not as clean as I had thought at one time that it was, because French like to think of themselves as the country par excellence that welcomes politically persecuted people, you know. And as a matter of fact, the way they handled the Spanish refugees was anything but edifying, because a lot of them spent years in these camps.
Now, one thing we haven't touched on at all is just the whole economic climate. France in the 30s was caught up in the Great Depression as much as anybody.
Absolutely.
Unemployment was in the 20s and 30s.
Unemployment, and this was the great struggle for unionization. You know, the unions existed, but for collective bargaining, for certain, I don't want to say perks, but you know, concession from management in terms of hours, and not just wages, but hours and benefits. And so there was France. There was a great deal of political turmoil in France in the 30s.
And in now, in starting with the German occupation in the summer of 1940, through the beginning of 41, which is where we are. Again, life went on as much as it had before.
Yes, and there was, there was no, a great many people had left Paris. I mean, not a great many, but a number of people left Paris and didn't return until after the German occupation.
Such as your family, your mother, yourself.
Yes, but some we returned to Paris. Some didn't.
Oh, okay.
Yes, did not return till after the end of the occupation.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
So until 44.
Yes.
Also, there were vacant buildings,
yes,
vacant
there
apartments.
Were not in huge numbers, but significant.
And what about the German garrison of Paris? How conspicuous was it?
Oh, very conspicuous. Very conspicuous. First of all, as I mentioned in that tape that Ed made in Paris, all of the major hotels were requisitioned by the Germans for officers and housing of German officers, German high command, and they were an important presence. And I'm sure that they occupied barracks that had been formerly occupied by French garrison.
Did you see them? Well, where were there sentries? Obviously, I guess it'd be sentry stationed in front of their headquarters. But
yes.
Were there sentries at key points? Did they have?
No, just in front of their, the hotels, in front of garages where Wehrmacht vehicles might be garaged, and
train stations?
No.
So there weren't a train station?
No.
Bridges?
No.
How did the general populace deal with them? Did they?
Just as I told you yesterday, just mostly ignored them.
Mostly ignored them.
Absolutely. You'd walk side by side, and they might as well not be there as far as most French people were concerned. As I told you, nobody rejoiced in the German occupation, even among those who wished to see a defeat of England. The French being extremely they're chauvinistic and they're xenophobic and they're patriotic and everything you want, but nobody likes to see his or her country occupied by foreign forces, even if they're friendly forces. I mean, after all, the Brits resented the Americans being there, and the Americans were there to save their necks. So, nobody likes to see a foreign uniform.
Right, particularly when it was a skull and cross.
Yes, and for most French people, they just went about their business. And as I said, if you kept your nose clean, did not involve yourself in any illegal activities such as indulging in the black market, although there were plenty of people who got rich in the black market, but it was like dealing in drugs here if you knew somebody and increase some paws. Black market was mostly a black market in food stuff. Food?
Yes. So people who had cousins who were farmers might smuggle in and they'd set up a network of...
Yes, but it would not be, people who had cousins who were farmers got the stuff for themselves.
Okay.
This was more organized. They would go from farm to farm, and they would have, obviously, teams collecting the food stuff, and they would justify it on patriotic grounds, that everything that they got on the black market didn't go to Germany.
Now, when did the first sign of resistance start? You mentioned yesterday, and again, Armistice Day of 1940. There was the arrest of students.
There were the arrest of students because they had obviously crossed an invisible boundary beyond which they shouldn't have crossed, and It was more than just, I think it was more than just wearing red, white, and blue. I think it was waving the flag, something like this. I forget whether the red, white, and blue flag was still the official flag of Vichy. I can't say.
Or was it red, white, and blue with an emblem imposed on the white?
It might have been. It might have been a Francisca. As I told you in that first Bastille Day, no, it must have been the second Bastille Day, because I was in Paris for the first Bastille Day under the German occupation. So it was July of 41, where we'd see girls walking up the Champs-Élysées in red, white, and blue attire,
Each one color.
Each one color, yes. But, they couldn't be arrested for that. But the students had been arrested the preceding Armistice Day, which was November 11th. And, but the first overt resistance I mentioned to you yesterday was after the invasion of Russia. And the word filtered down from Moscow that the Germans were fair game at that point.
Right. I think it's on the first tape, but when we covered just the fact that we talked about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and the fact that this was a capitalist war.
But what I had mentioned was the first assassination of a German soldier.
Right. Why don't you talk about that again?
Well, it was obviously summer or fall of 41. This is strictly based on the assumption that it occurred after the invasion of Russia.
Right.
Because I don't really know exactly the date. But it was the assassination of a lone German soldier by either Colonel Fabien, who later became a famous member of the Resistance, and or somebody closely connected with him. And the first manifestation of resistance were lone assassination, or assassination of lone soldiers, which the general consensus was that this was senseless acts, if not cowardly acts, but they were senseless because from every German soldier killed, the German commandantur, as I mentioned yesterday, plastered posters. Billboards, small, about Jebel, printed in German and French, usually on magenta-colored paper to attract attention. Magenta had been something like purple, light purple.
Right.
And where they would list the names of hostages that had been killed in retaliation.
Now these hostages, the first of these hostages, the French students arrested on the Armistice Day.
There might have been one of them among them. Some of them were, as I mentioned, communists, or
trade
Jews, trade unions, yes. Anybody who had been arrested, they would not have taken a common criminal out of jail to assassinate, to kill him in retaliation. They usually took people who had been picked up for what were considered infraction to occupation rules. So.
Even if the infraction was merely your existence?
Yes.
Such as being a Jew or being a communist?
Yes, or being a communist, yes. Or they had been arrested on one pretext or another. And it might be with the complicity of the French police. It might be that the French police had them in detention at the prison of Fresnes or Suresnes or whatever the name of the prison, I can't remember. But these usually, and they would give the age too. It would list the age of the people shot. And as I recall, there were some very young people shot. And
15?
16, 17. And I personally consider this type of attack on soldiers despicable. It's shooting someone in the back. That's not war. That's murder. And they were senseless acts. They were acts of bravado.
Right.
That were only gratifying to the person who committed them. And 10 lives sacrificed for this act of bravado. And I think that my recollection, with the general consensus was that this was senseless acts.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we had been, we had signed an armistice, and if we had been still in warfare and this was guerrilla warfare, that would have been one thing, as it developed later.
Right.
But at that point it was not. At that point it was not. To give you, I can't give you a history of the beginning of the resistance, but so far as I know, this was, you know, the origin. Then, of course, later on, it became more organized. There were contacts. Men actually went to England and came back. Some were parachuted back. Others actually managed to go by boat, and then they would come back. And so there was the French government in exile, if you can call it a French government in exile. De Gaulle represented France.
And de Gaulle's last official position had been as Minister of Defense?
I thought it was as Minister of Defense, but it was, if not minister, it was, you know, something similar to that.
And I think yesterday you said that Pétain had him
tried in absentia.
And sentenced to death.
Yes, he was sentenced to death in absentia. For desertion, I believe.
Coming back to life in Paris, do you remember, did they have municipal elections? Were there any, all political life was interdicted?
Totally adonate. Totally suspended. There were no elections. There was no such thing.
And daily newspapers?
Yes, but strictly censored. Strictly censored.
And a very brief, paper must have been rationed.
Paper was strictly rationed, and a newspaper would be 4 pages, except for literary papers, literary journals, which usually in France were the format of the New York Times. Not a book review, not a magazine, full-page format. And those, because they were issued, or they were printed with the permission of the occupying forces. They were usually, the articles were written by collaborating critics. There'd be movie critics or literary critics, great names in French culture of the day. And these periodicals, we might have up to 8 or 12 pages, these journals, but they only appeared once a month, once a week.
Now you mentioned yesterday, and again it might be on the ill-fated tape, Maurice,
L'Action Française,
Action.
Charles Maurras.
Charles
Maurras, M-A-U-R-R-A-S. Yes, Charles Maurras would not submit. He hated the Bush. He was an extreme right-wing reactionary.
A xenophobe?
Oh, yes, and Jew-hating, Jew-baiting. I think he probably invented the original form of outing, which was to say, Claude Bernard, born Claude Lévy. In other words, they would divulge if any prominent Jew had changed his name and was not known generally as a Jew, then l'Action Française would rejoice in revealing.
Now you mentioned, was he the one, or you mentioned somebody yesterday who said that, or perhaps it was somebody you were speaking with, who said that it was impossible for a Jew to ever be a Frenchman, even if he converted.
Yes, that was a student I was talking to.
Yeah.
And l'Action Française, that's exactly what they felt. I mean, they felt that there was something in, and I hate this expression, but this is the way they use it, not les Juifs, le Juif, not the Jews, the Jew, you know, as if there was one prototype and everything.
Right.
And I find, you know, I find this referring to Jews in this fashion most offensive. Le Juif, you know, not les Juifs, le Juif.
Was the ground in pre-war France fertile for anti-Semitism, where the French, as I think we talked about yesterday, the French are sort of lip service Catholics a little bit more than that, but not a lot more than that. There's a strong overlay of the Enlightenment and rationalism and skepticism, but nonetheless, you look, for example, in Germany, for some reason that I think people still don't understand, Germany, once the seeds of anti-Semitism were planted, they sprouted virulently.
Yes, it depended on the milieu in France, as I mentioned. I think in an extremely Catholic conservative milieu, yes, there was still atavistic anti-Semitism.
The Christ killers.
Yes, not even that so much as the alien to Western culture. In fact, not just the alien, but the enemy. I mentioned this critic, Camille Mauclair, who wrote this book, Les métèques contre l'art français. And the métèque is a term of opprobrium, lumping under one name all that's Levantine and of doubtful origin and not ethical. It's all
dirty,
all involved.
the bizarre.
Yes, and métèque, and all the Jews were dubbed métèque, even though they might have been in France since the early Middle Ages. They're still called métèque.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing we haven't touched on. What was the relationship between the Jewish community that had been in France for centuries and the more recent immigrants? Did the former hold themselves aloof from the latter?
Yes, to a large degree. It was pretty much as the German Jewish community in New York. The Lehmans and or the great banking families that had, even though they might not have been in the U.S. for more than one or two generations, still had been very prominent in their country of origin, and they came not as paupers but as bankers. And they helped the immigrants, but they did not mix with them, And it was pretty much the same in France. The more what is the word for I can't think of the word who have adapted and adopted assimilated. The more assimilated did not look with favor upon the more recent immigrants, and that's fairly standard human reaction, because anything that reminds the population at large of a foreign element is a threat to them. So the more assimilated did not look very kindly upon the more recent immigrants. They viewed them almost as the French did, as interlopers.
Now, being a Jew, how much did that come into play in your life as a child and as a teenager?
Very much. As a matter of fact, I remember I felt very much an outsider at Christmas because we did not observe Christmas. And of course, always, what did you get for Christmas when you go back to school,
And this was before Hanukkah had been elevated, and
yes, Hanukkah was hardly.
Yeah, it was just a small.
It's more observed here than it is, in Europe. And except for the lighting of the candles, possibly, for the
menorah. So you felt very much
yes,
the
and at First Holy Communion every year, at a certain age, every girl, whether her father and mother were communists or not, made her First Holy Communion. So you would very much, and then the girls, they would always be, if they did not go to parochial schools, there were parochial schools. If they didn't go to parochial school and they went to public school, they went to catechism on certain days of the week. Well, I didn't go to catechism, so that already, and put me out of the mainstream. But the main thing was that I had a girlfriend who was trying to convert me to Catholicism.
Oh.
And I think we were all of 11 years old at the time. And there was, as a Jew, you were very much aware of the fact that you might be tolerated, but not fully accepted. And again, as I said, it depends on the milieu. I mean, deeply Catholic, conservative, old France, vieille France. You were an interloper.
And now, Was there a common cause with the other minorities, the Protestants?
No.
No, so
No. The Protestants, after all, were of French racial origin, you know. And the Protestants were very, very successful in banking, and there were a few poor Protestants. So, descendants of the Huguenots, and there were some great families among the Huguenots. So they were not considered aliens. You know, they might be viewed as benighted for believing in, for choosing to be Protestant instead of Catholic. But no, there was never any common cause between the Protestants and other minorities.
You once said in the past that as a girl, it was one of your great wishes was to be hated for yourself, not as a Jew.
Yes, because it was always, if there was a dispute, it always ended up, you dirty Jew, you know.
Even from the girls?
Absolutely, yes. I remember one time in grade school, how old was I? 11, I think. And this girl called me a dirty kike. Sale Yupine. And we ended up rolling on the ground. I was pummeling her. That's not the kind of talk I tolerate. And I attacked her physically. And I didn't mind being disliked. But I wanted it to be because I deserved disliking, not because I was a Jew, or because I had an aquiline nose, or because I had curly hair. You know, so my ambition, as I told you, and you know, you laughed at me at the time, but that's very true.
No.
My ambition was to be hated for myself. And I meant I didn't want to be hated.
Right.
But by God, if you hate me, let it be because I deserve your hatred, or you know.
Now, how did your parents deal with this anti-Semitism? They left Poland, which obviously was just virulently anti-Semitic. I think I've read that the pre-war Polish population, at least in some cities, was up to a third Jewish.
It was in small cities, not in Warsaw. Warsaw had a large Polish, Jewish population. It was increased by the number of Jews who were expelled from smaller towns and forced to go to Warsaw in the ghetto.
Yeah, and the Jews and the Poles obviously had a very problematic history.
Yes, but you know, if you read Isaac Bashevis Singer, you realize that it was far more symbiotic than people realized. In Isaac Bashevis Singer, there are stories of Jewish girls marrying into the Polish nobility, which I would never have believed until. And you know, Isaac Bashevis Singer, like all fiction writers, dips into his store of memories or facts that he knows to be true. He would not. He's much too great a writer to invent unbelievable, you know, things that could not happen. There was, in many places, a symbiotic relationship, even though it was deeply resented.
Well, I know that one reason a lot of people don't understand. One reason the Jews went into banking in the Middle Ages and later was because Christians. There were usury laws.
Yes.
And much as with modern Islam. And
but the funny thing is that's how the Medici got their start.
As the bankers?
No, as usurers.
Oh.
Yes. You know what the symbol of
Florence?
No, Mont-Piété, which is Mont-Piété is a funny thing. Mont-Piété is the official pawn shop. It's an official pawn shop maintained by the city of Paris.
Oh, okay.
And it's called Mont de Piété.
The Mount
of Piety, yes. Why, I don't know. But anyway, it's because probably it originated, I think, in the Middle Ages, and that's where people could legally go and hawk something and get money in exchange, and it was legal, and it bears a minimal interest. But the symbol was 3 spheres.
I think that's still used for.
And that figures in the codes of the Medici, coat of arms.
I wonder what.
They were usurers at first, and then bankers.
Yeah.
So you know, it was as I've read since, it was the common belief, and it's true to a large degree, that the Jews went into banking because that's the only occupation outside of the ghetto, let us say.
Right.
Within the ghetto, they could indulge in anything between themselves, but in a transaction with a Gentile, money lending was the only thing they could do. But the notion that no Gentile indulged in money lending,
yes, I mean, believe me,
yes.
people,
yes.
yeah. Well, I started to ask, how did your parents deal with the anti-Semitism? And I mean, when you would come home from school and say that somebody called you so and so.
My mother would say, salt in their eyes and pepper in their nose. That was a form of curse. That was it.
How did your father was very proper, so your father, I mean, I take it that after your father had had his morning bath, that you never saw him out without a tie and a waistcoat?
That was standard. That was standard.
And your mother, how did she dress during the day?
Oh, the way Dora does, dress.
Okay.
Just stockings.
Yeah.
The way we do in Paris. I
Yeah.
mean, not the way we dress in Park Forest.
Right.
When I came to this country, women would still wear hat and gloves, even to go buy a dress at a local shop. So things were far more formal in the day. So it wasn't strictly my family.
It's how did your mother occupy your day?
I don't know. I mean,
Just
she had to rest a great deal.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And but I was in school most of the day, so school in France starts at 8 and ends at 4. And sometimes, in order to ensure that I did my homework, I would be enrolled in what was called what was the name of that? Anyway, you could stay from 4 to 6.
Detention?
No, it was not detention. You stayed at school from 4 to 6 for the entire semester to do your homework. It was supervised homework.
Was this at your father's behest?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, certainly. I mean, because that was one way of ensuring that I did my homework, because otherwise.
Nathan didn't suffer this indignity.
No.
He was
But I was not the only one. This was a standard thing.
Yes.
I mean,
I understand.
It was.
I understand.
The name escapes me, but it was a standard thing. Women who had to work till 6 o'clock would enroll their children in that. After school ended at 4 o'clock, we'd have a recess of half an hour, and then we'd go back in the classroom, and one single classroom, where kids from various grades would gather, and there would be a teacher sitting there supervising, but we did our homework.
And how did you get to school? Did you take the subway? Was it close enough to walk?
It was close enough to walk.
Close enough to walk?
Oh yes, there was no grade school kids don't take the subway. It wasn't. I did take the subway occasionally to go to the lycée, because if I ran late, as I usually did, it was faster to go by subway than to walk. But otherwise, I walked. I don't know if we retraced that. Walk down Rue de la Pompe and down Avenue Mozart, and it would take 20 minutes to walk. So with subway, much faster. 2 stops, and I was there.
Your dad did not have a high regard of the French.
No.
He said the French treat their dogs better than their children.
No, he didn't say that. He said that the French women would rather have a dog than a child. And he used to sneer at the fact that all their life was concentrated in a cafe, corner bistro,
Waste of time.
Yeah, and frivolous. No, it's not that he was all that addicted to serious occupation. It's just that it seemed to him to symbolize the vacuity of people's lives. That they occupied the fruitless. They had no children, and they'd spend their time at the cafe.
Coming back. Okay, so we're in the first part of 41.
Yes, and you asked me about that winter. There was a winter that was very cold. The first winter, it might be the first or the second winter, because remember there's this winter of 40, 41, and the winter of 41, 42. One of those two, I think it was the first winter, where the Germans were seizing foodstuff and sending it on to Germany. And we ended up with the frozen potatoes, the potatoes that they wouldn't ship to Germany. And
that was the only thing that you could get with your food coupons.
At that point, I don't know if the potatoes were rationed. When you could get them, there were frozen potatoes. We had a vast supply of rutabagas, and which is a huge kind of turnip, you know, taste. And when I remember being at a theater of chansonniers, which are the stand-up comedians, and where he said that all we had to eat was the rutabagas, and to make it more palatable, we had the rutas at lunch and the bagas for dinner, you know. We called it the winter, rutabaga winter. That was when things were at their worst in terms of food supply.
And was it 40-41 or 41-42?
I think it was 40-41, but I can't be sure. It seems to me that it was the first winter when things were, the Germans were taking everything, but they hadn't hit the stride in knowing how to placate the population by making just enough food stuff available to keep from open, you know, there wouldn't have been open revolt, but open discontent and tolerance of the status quo. And the second winter, I think the second winter, the black market was pretty well established. So if you had money,
you could get what you.
Yes, you could buy meat. You could go to a luxury restaurant and never had to give a food stamp. Those food coupons, you know, they look like stamps.
Things like sugar was rationed.
Very, very strictly. Even though sugar in France is made of sugar beet, and it's not sugar cane, so it's grown locally. We're still very strictly rationed.
And what about artificial sugars?
Saccharin, oh, we had plenty of that, and to this day I will not drink anything that is artificially sweetened.
Because it reminds you.
Saccharin has a very bitter aftertaste. But
salt?
there were...
Salt?
No, not rationed.
Not rationed?
Not rationed.
Bread? The baguette?
Very strictly.
So
very strictly. We had, first of all, it was bread that was only partly flour. A lot of it was son, S-O-N, and this is the chaff.
Oh, the sort of the cellulose matter from the wheat stalks.
Yes, and it was mingled with the flour. And things, as I said, milk, they had categories. J1, J4, jeune, youth, were infants. J2 was from 3 to the early teens. And then they had the J3s. And the J3s were the teenagers. And it became, in fact, they even made a movie called Les J3, and that became synonymous with teenagers here, you know. And these were where the rations were supposed to be a little more generous than for other people, because these were the years of growth, physical growth. But in reality, you know, we got the ration that I remember was 150 grams of meat per person per week. That's 3 ounces. No, 4 ounces.
So approximately a quarter pounder. A McDonald's quarter pounder.
Wait, that's 5 ounces. 150 grams is 5 ounces.
They're 280 grams.
An ounce is about 30 grams. So 150.
Yeah. There are 28 grams in an ounce.
Yeah, 28. I'd say roughly 30.
Yeah.
So 150 grams is 5 ounces. 3 eggs a month. The sugar, I think, was, you know, the rations obviously had some variance, but it was, by and large, it was pretty much that. 300 grams of bread per person per day. I don't think it was a pound of sugar a month per person. It must have been half a pound. It was very meager. And there were days without meat. The butcher was closed Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Then there were days without alcohol. Well, you could not go to the cafe and order a cognac. But you ordered it anyway because you got it in a coffee cup. You know, I was not and never have been a cognac drinker, but that's how men got there. So, you know. Because those 3 days without alcohol, you can imagine, that was severe punishment.
All the sidewalk cafes.
They were open.
They were all open,
yes.
And so there was no. It wasn't like the lights were out in Paris.
No, the sidewalk cafes were open. You could order aperitif. You could order coffee. It wasn't coffee. It was ersatz. It was made with chicory and whatever else.
How much? The British had a blockade going on of the continent, and so that presumably had something to do with the loss of coffee.
Well, I don't know where France imports its coffee from, but Africa, obviously, it required shipping resources that were not allocated for that purpose. You know.
How was all this paid for? What was the currency?
Francs.
Was it pre-war francs or was it the Vichy francs?
No, it was the same denomination, except that the coins and the banknotes were changed from Marianne to the Francisco.
Do you remember when that happened? Do you remember?
No, and I don't remember. I don't even remember how the banknotes had been altered. Obviously, like here, banknotes have, like right now, the current banknotes in France have the likeness of maybe Descartes and Rabelais, or I forget who was the favored effigies on these banknotes. All I remember is the coins that said État Français and the Francisque.
So the pre-war currency was no longer valid.
It's not that it wasn't valid, it's just that little by little it withdrew from circulation. You know, you pay 100 francs to the butcher banks it, and from the bank it goes to the to the mint to be destroyed and replaced by a new one. I don't know that it was ever declared invalid.
The cultural life. There were very few French cultural icons who followed, say, the model of Marlene Dietrich, who left Germany and made films in Hollywood against the war.
Charles Boyer, he was already in Hollywood. He did not return, and he spent the war years in Hollywood. Jean Gabin did.
He left?
Oh yes, he was Marlene Dietrich's lover, incidentally.
Oh.
Yeah. Jean Gabin was the popular movie star of the 30s.
He's in The Grand Illusion?
Yes, he's almost the main protagonist. Jean Gabin was in Pépé le Mocco.
Also, The Wages of Fear.
No, he's not in Wages of Fear. That's Yves Montand and Charles Vanel.
Charles Vanel.
Yes. Charles Vanel stayed, and but not many really. Some left to join de Gaulle in London. Louis Jouvet, who was a great actor, wonderful actor, happened to be in New York, I think, and spent the war years touring South America with his troupe. Didn't return to France still after the war. But by and large, most of the pre-war actors stayed. They had to, in order to work, they had to be approved by the Germans. By the Germans, yes.
And
but the theater was thriving. Theater in Paris. Now
under censorship.
Under censorship, yes, always. But Jean-Paul Sartre made it appear later that some of the plays he wrote during the German occupation were crypto attacks on the Germans. I don't think so, but Henri de Monterland, who was a great writer, and
where did Malraux spend the war?
In London.
In London.
Yes.
Where did?
Wait a moment. He was made a prisoner of war. He escaped. He went to the free zone, and then from the free zone, I think he managed to get his way to London.
And what about who's the Catholic novelist?
Well,
Marat.
Charles Marat. not Mauroy. André Mauroy was a Jew. Mauriac.
Yeah.
Mauriac was, I believe, in the free zone.
In the free zone?
Yes, I think so.
What? So, was there active collaboration by any of the leading lights? Did any of them?
Yes. There were men of letters like Drieux La Rochelle. I think he was executed after the war. But there were men who had, in their past, been extreme right-wing people.
Mm-hmm.
And I must emphasize again, I don't think any Frenchman was truly enamored of the Germans.
Right.
But they saw them as a means to rid France of undesirable elements, alien philosophies like communism, undesirable elements, Jews, unwelcome influences like what they considered degenerate art. In other words, a return to, pure French culture, unsullied.
And we talked yesterday, again on the tape that didn't make it, I believe, that many of these reactionaries, while they embraced Impressionism, that Degas and Benoit and
Degas was a major anti-Semite.
Yeah, as well as having problems with women. But that these men had been embraced into the French canon, but that nonetheless that there was a feeling that the art dealers were Jews getting rich off of French patrimony.
Yes. Not that so much. Foisting degenerate art.
And the degenerate art in this case would have been the Kandinskys, the Clays.
Yes. Whoever.
The later generation Picassos.
Yes, definitely. It would have been, but it would have been anything after, let's say, Monet. Who was the one who died in 1926? I think it was Monet. Okay. And after that, it was downhill all the way as far as the French were concerned. It was foreign influence. It was like the German expressionism, which was would have been considered by the French by a French critic of the ilk of Camille Mauclair as being degenerate art.
Was Monet, where is the building where the Monet water lilies are a round room and they've been glued to the wall?
Yes, there are two of them. There's one at...
you took me to one.
Yes, there's one at a small museum off the Place de la Muette that is housed in what was a private mansion, or what's called Hôtel Particulier. The other one is at there are two structures at the entrance to the Tuileries Garden. One's on the right, one's on the left. One is the Jeu de Paume, and the other one is, and I can't think of the name of it right now, but one is a museum of early 19th century art, and the other one on the left is the one where in the underground circular chambers they have these water lilies.
And now that was in place before the war.
Yes. I think they were installed there before the war. It might have been.
The Germans didn't loot the Louvre?
No, I was very puzzled by reading references to the Germans trying to loot French museums. So far as I know, Goering might have had ambitions to get some of it, and he had private viewings of some museum where works of art were warehoused, but a lot of what was in the Louvre had been removed at the beginning of the war, just for protection of the work of art should Paris be bombed.
And where was it placed?
I don't know. I know that there was stained glass windows of Chartres had been removed.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. And I don't know about the Sainte-Chapelle. They must have been removed too. The French took great precautions, not so much against predatory enemy as against bombing.
Right.
Conflagration, physical conflagration. So a lot of this had been put in safe keeping. I used to go to the Louvre a great deal, And so it wasn't empty by any manner of means.
This was during the war?
Yes. And
did you have a sketchbook? Would you sketch?
Oh no.
You just went to
yeah, I have no talent as a, you know.
It was just to escape the
yeah, it was, you know, I love art. Yes, I love art. And
what about the library? Was that another refuge?
No. The municipal libraries were virtually nothing, you know, and the scholarly libraries are closed to anybody but students. So, which, like at the University of Chicago Library, you have to be a student or a scholar to it. Bibliothèque Nationale is not, it's open just to look, but not to borrow books from. No, I bought the periodicals, the literary periodicals, and I had books.
The universities, the left bank was vibrant during this time?
Oh, yes.
So the Sorbonne was
Sorbonne?
Sorbonne was not closed?
No, none of these were closed.
No. When did the anti-Jewish interdiction start to bind?
1941.
1941.
Yeah, there was a famous Latin scholar, a scholar of life in ancient Rome. That was his field. His name was Jérôme Carcopino, and he was rector of the University of Paris. And it was under his guidance, it was under his reign as rector that Jewish students were expelled. And he claimed, of course, and it was claimed on his behalf, that he had no choice. He was simply implementing. Well, you can implement with more or less zeal, and Jérôme Carcopino was very zealous.
And the Jewish faculty lost their jobs?
Everything, yes.
Yeah. And this was what time in 41?
I can't say. I really don't know.
Now, the tenor of the occupation changed once the Germans had attacked Russia in June.
Yes.
And it changed for several reasons. One is that the younger German garrison troops were shipped off to the Eastern Front.
and it became more and more pronounced. And we started to see older garrison troops, but quite late in the occupation.
Okay, so
yes.
So in 41, it's still
there's still those very good-looking young men striding the streets in their uniforms. They're conquerors, you know, but nobody paid attention to them really. I mean, it's not to say that there weren't French girls going out with them. There were, but not many. Usually, if they did, they were prostitutes or. But there were, you know, cross-cultural love affairs, obviously.
Sure. Well, I mean, one thing, it's a little reminiscent, Ionesco's play Rhinoceroses, about the village, which is a metaphor for many things, not least of which, I mean, mainly I've always taken it as for the professed ignorance to the Holocaust. But it sounds a little bit like the Parisians essentially played rhinoceroses. Yeah, they chose not to notice. That, you know, if a German sat down at the table next to you, that
you just didn't even know he was there.
You didn't even know he was there. If he asked you for a match, you might give it to him. You might pretend not to have it.
Yes.
But you would never you wouldn't strike up a conversation.
Never.
You wouldn't.
Never.
Yeah.
Never.
And
there was not that kind of collaboration. The kind of collaboration that was really prevalent was in the arts, in letters, among people who, if they wanted to remain in their profession, had no choice but to submit to approval, number one. And number two, if they wanted to thrive, would actively seek to be part of the party scene at Otto Abbett's German embassy. And a lot of them did.
Now, what probably made this obliviousness, this oblivion more convenient was that a lot of them were communists, and until the invasion, that essentially, again, it was a plague on both your houses.
Yes.
So, for example, Picasso is a very dubious wartime record.
Yes.
It's doubtful Picasso ever missed a meal.
No. And I don't even know if he was in Paris the whole time. He obviously had leeway to travel. Yeah.
Now, what's the famous story of Picasso? Picasso, there was a Jewish painter who was friends with Picasso, and he was arrested And he thought Picasso could intercede.
Yeah, I think it was Max Ernst.
Max Ernst? I'm not sure if he was that famous. I thought he was somewhat more obscure.
Oh, it's possible.
But
I'm not
that
familiar
he was
with
a
that.
second-tier painter, and he sent a desperate request to Picasso, and Picasso ignored it.
Yes. Oh, I don't know anything about that, but I wouldn't doubt it. You know, I have very, very little respect for the French intelligentsia that chose to remain in Paris.
And by and large, that was the majority.
A great deal, yes. There was a journalist named Jean Lucher, who was actually a newspaper owner, an editor and a newspaper owner. And he belonged to a fairly illustrious family. One of the illustrious, not in the sense of great nobility, but you know, had been prominent, right. I should say, rather than illustrious. His grandmother or great-grandmother had been one of the great actresses of the Comédie Française, named Réjeanne, a contemporary of Sarah Bernhardt. And he published a newspaper throughout the occupation. I think he was shot after the occupation. His daughter, Corinne Lucher, was a movie actress who had a notorious relationship with a German officer. And I think she was sent to a mental institution after the war. I don't know if it was by her family or what, but you know, they obviously pleaded insanity.
Sort of like Ezra Pound?
Something like that. But I know her father was shot. And
Joyce wasn't in Paris
no,
during the war?
No.
Where did he?
I think he was in Switzerland.
Switzerland?
Oh yeah, I think he lived in Switzerland, in Lausanne.
Lausanne?
Yes.
And when did now the La Vie Bohème?
La Vie de Bohème.
The Lost Generation, Sylvia Plath, Shakespeare and Company.
No, Sylvia Plath was
not
in
Sylvia
the 50s.
Plath. I'm sorry.
Sylvia
Beach.
Beach, yes.
Sylvia Beach.
Yes.
Shakespeare and Company.
That was on the left bank, behind the Palais, behind the Odeon Theatre.
Now I know that most of the Americans had left by the late 30s. And
No. All through the German occupation, one of the most colorful character in Saint-Germain-des-Prés was Raymond Duncan, who was Isidore Duncan's brother.
When you say colorful, what elaborate?
Colorful?
Yeah.
He dressed in a toga.
He dressed
in a toga, yes.
And
he was dressed, and he was American. I mean, Isidore Duncan was an American.
Yeah. Was he
somewhat, but he was a member of the
for the
crowd.
Camera's sake, that was a crazy sign.
And you even saw him immediately after the occupation, but he was German. I mean, American.
Was Josephine Baker in Paris during the war?
No, she was. She left. She was in the free zone, and she was decorated for work on behalf of the resistance. I don't think. She might have been in Paris part of the time, but she obviously did not choose to collaborate. Well, the Germans had certain notions of racial inferiority. Absolutely. They would not have consorted with Josephine Baker.
I'm trying to remember. I don't think the black jazz diaspora had begun. I think that was a post-World War II phenomenon.
It was pre-World War II and post-World War II.
Pre-World War II.
Oh yes, they already had. Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember because there was. Coleman Hawkins.
I'm not saying that they went there to live, but they certainly went there to play.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
They went there to live after the war.
And did the Germans ban jazz? It sounds like the Germans tried to have a fairly light hand on the French.
Yes, because as I explained to someone, they were trying to make allies of the French. They did not treat them the way they treated the Poles or the Romanians or whoever, of Central Europe that came under German occupation. They were trying to win the French over. That's why there was this collaboration with the French intelligentsia.
Now, the Kommandantur, at least in movies that I've seen portrayed, was supposed to have been a Francophile. He was a German officer, or what's?
No. That's different. You're talking about the general who was in charge of occupation forces. The Kommandantur was more the German in charge of police.
Okay.
In matters that referred to the policing. Oh, look at that.
Did he go? I was going to get him on the film.
Yes.
I'll have to change this.
Yes,
In case the camera couldn't see it, that was a hummingbird. I hope it came into view, because it was right over your head.
The German commandant too issued laissez-passer, which was authorization for travel. You know, you have to go to the commandant too, but it was more administrative. The German general who refused to blow up Paris was not part of the commandant tour. That was something else.
Was the commandant tour? What about the SS? Did you ever see SS? Did you see Gestapo? Would you have been able to tell?
We knew, no.
So
Because
it wasn't
first
like
of
the
all,
cliches.
Gestapo usually did not wear uniform.
It wasn't like the cliche sitcoms where the Gestapo's wearing a calf-length black leather coat.
You know, I laugh every time I see Casablanca because I never saw a German officer behaving the way the German officer does in that, who orders a tin of caviar and speaks of the superiority of the Reich. I mean, maybe they did, but that was not their shtick. Their shtick was to try to make allies of the French. The better to strengthen their position in Europe and use whatever French resources could be appropriated with the consent of the French. You know. And
the French in the countryside, did they have they had a much different experience of occupation than I must imagine the city French.
They never saw Germans.
They never saw Germans. They probably never had much food hardship because...
Well, the rationing existed, but you know,
so
when you
close
can
to
grow,
the farm.
Well, when you can grow your own potatoes in your backyard,
right, and have chickens.
And have chickens, yes. So they weren't subject to that, you know. And obviously, well, there were German troops in Brest, because that was a major seaport, and there were German troops in
Bordeaux.
In Bordeaux, and there were German troops in, you know, there were German troops in every major occupied city.
And did the German troops, were they guarding the border with Spain?
No.
That was French troops.
Yes.
That was French troops.
Not, as I told you, it was not till I got back from after the invasion of North Africa that I noticed this German sentry guarding.
We'll come back to that because that's a really good...
And you know, my first reaction was, oh, and then I thought, now wait a moment, what's incongruous about this picture? What the hell is that German soldier doing there?
And obviously, I mean, people were buying furs because your father was going off to work.
Oh yeah, there were furs.
So essentially, life was continuing. The French were pretending, were practicing a studied ignorance of the Germans.
Yes, and the couturiers showed their fashion show twice a year. The great restaurants functioned, albeit with a lesser menu, less extensive than normal, but
probably,
they functioned.
It was the absence of tourists more than anything else that probably told you something was different.
Yes, but even so, you know, before World War II, well, France was the mecca for the rich. Tourists were not in the vast numbers that you've seen since. Paris did not live off tourists.
Not then.
Not then, no.
Yeah, well, it was before the jet.
Yes, as I said, it was always the mecca for the rich and the famous, but those constitute a small minority of the planet.
And I asked you yesterday about radio and listening to the BBC.
Yes,
and you explained that the BBC, it took some time to ramp up. And
and when the Gaulle's appeal to the French was first broadcast on the BBC, June 17th, I think it was. I think it's called L'Appel du 17 Juin. And that's where he appealed to the French. He said that France had lost a battle but had not lost the ball. And he invited all French people to come and join him in London. All French, I mean, you know, able-bodied men.
And did the Germans maintain a close watch on like the fishing fleets to?
Oh yes, definitely.
To make sure that you didn't have young French men.
Oh yes, definitely.
But it sounds like in a way they needn't have bothered. There wasn't going to be this massive stampede of
there was not.
French manhood.
No, because most men had family obligations.
Obligations, and again the French attitude was we're well shut of this.
Well,
this is
well, not exactly that. It was there's nothing we can do at this time. You know, resistance is futile. There's been an armistice. We don't have arms. We don't have anything.
And don't rock the boat.
And don't rock the boat. And eventually the Germans will be defeated. We don't know how, but you know. And it's a notorious fact that the appeal of General de Gaulle was not heard by I would say 99% of the Frenchmen. Nobody thought of listening to the BBC. It was broadcast on the BBC. And it was shortly, they began then broadcast, it probably was fairly soon after that they began regular broadcast, you know, pep talks. But the majority of people who listen to the BBC listen to have news of the war in Russia, to have news of the progress of the Allied cause in various venues. And when the resistance was really an organized network with fairly extensive diffusion, you know, over the territory, they would broadcast coded messages to indicate when there'd be an airdrop, for instance, of arms or they call it CBs, you know, radio for radio communication, you know, and they would have messages like the Eagle has landed. Repeat, the Eagle has landed. A message for Mireille in Cannes. The pig has lost its head, or something like this. You know, some nonsensical messages, but that had clear meaning for somebody.
Right.
And it was a strictly a forbidden activity.
You said yesterday that listening to the BBC was something that could lead to
arrest. Yes, it would be.
And you said that the primary method would have been denunciation. A neighbor would have heard it.
Yes.
And how much denunciation was going on?
A lot. I can't tell you in numbers, but thousands upon thousands upon thousands of letters. People who would be denouncing their next door neighbor as Jews, for instance. The neighbor might be called Dupont or Dubois, and they would say his real name is Levy and he's a Jew, you know. Or he's doing black market, or he is listening to the BBC, or whatever, you know. They used. In fact, there was a movie made at the time which gave rise to a great deal of controversy. And it was banned in France for many, many years after World War II. And it was called Le Corbeau, the Raven. And he deals with an anonymous letter writer in a French town who signs his letters Le Corbeau, the Raven. And this is not necessarily letters to the authority. It's letters to a doctor, your wife is committing adultery with so-and-so. But it was viewed as a metaphor. And it was bitterly resented by some and applauded by others. And as I said, because of the implication that the French indulge in massive anonymous denunciation, it was one of those cultural artifacts that was swept under the rug after the German occupation. Nobody talked about it.
What about the film? Was it Au revoir les enfants? Was that made during the war?
Oh no.
Which is the war film that you asked me to look for? You said there was a film that I thought it was a film.
This Au revoir les enfants.
It's set during.
Yes.
Okay.
It's about Louis Malle's experience as a boarder in a Catholic boarding school where one of the children is a little Jewish boy who is there, who's being stashed away, so to speak.
Let's come back to that. But also, isn't there a film? What's the film about the French acting troupe? I thought there was a film about French actors, and it says a play within a play.
Oh yes, that's but that's a Truffaut film, and it's called The Last Metro. Le Dernier Métro with Catherine Deneuve.
No, I didn't think so. I thought it was a film at the time, but were there any French films of that period that apart from Le Corbeau, that addressed this, that talked about this?
No.
No. It was essentially.
Essentially, there were films noirs, Les Étrangers dans la Maison. There were love stories like Premier Rendezvous. There were, the usual gamut of topics for films, but certainly nothing political except for Le Corbeau. And there were great films like Les Visiteurs du Soir, which are considered great art, but had nothing to do with the current event takes place in the Middle Ages. They might, at the outside, might be considered a allegorical, but I don't really think so. But anyway. Les Enfants du Paradis, I can't remember whether that was made in the immediate post-war or during the war. No, it was made, yes, it was made before the end of the occupation, Les Enfants du Paradis, because it had this very prominent actress named Arletty playing the principal role, and she had a German lover. She practiced what the French call horizontal collaboration, collaboration horizontale. She also practiced the other kind of collaboration, which is entertaining in Germany, But she defended herself. She was banned from appearing in movies and the theater for a number of years after the German occupation. And she defended herself against accusation of having had a German lover by saying, "My heart is French, but my ass is international."
Did she get the shaved head?
That only happened to hapless women who live with a non-com or,
You mentioned yesterday that one of the Vice daughters had been a minister. Was it?
One of the sisters.
One of the sisters.
Yes.
What happened to her during?
Obviously she was not in Paris.
She wasn't in Paris.
No, she would not. She would not have been left at liberty because she was for the French authorities. You see, but there was a infamous political trial, a show trial held by the Vichy government, the trials of Rion, that put on trial the leaders of the Third Republic for having been the cause of the defeat of France. And you don't remember seeing that episode where Pierre Mendès France had been arrested and he was planning his escape. He was put on trial as having been a member. Léon Blum was put on trial. And
in absentia or in person?
No, in person. And
what was her fate?
He survived. He died sometime after the German occupation, I think. But others were murdered. Nobody was. I don't believe anybody was condemned to death. But there were show trials held in the Free France, not in occupied France. And had Louis Weiss been available, they might have put. I doubt it though, because after all, the post she occupied was more of a sub-cabinet post.
Right, not one of the major.
No.
It's
not policy making anyway.
Right. So the institutions of worship are proceeding apace. The cathedrals, the synagogues.
No, obviously not.
So the synagogues have been closed.
That's my.
Well, remember you said that your father
yes,
went to
but
synagogue
but a lot of these things evolved over a period of time,
right.
And I think that after a period of time they were closed.
So sometime in 1941.
Yes. I would think so. Yes, I can't swear to it, but I think so.
Now, when was the decree signed about the liquidation of French businesses? I mean, not French, Jewish businesses.
I would say 1941. And this man, whose name I couldn't remember yesterday on the tape, was Darquier de Pellepoix. And this was Commissariat Général aux Affaires Juives, I think, aux Questions Juives. I forget what the exact title was. And everything was expropriated.
No compensation?
No. Everything was expropriated.
Now, was this true not just of the denationalized immigrants, but was it also true of, say, the Rothschilds?
Anybody. The Rothschild had a magnificent mansion at the end of Avenue Henri Martin, where we lived. Beautiful mansion in very extensive grounds, and that was occupied by Germans. And their art looted. Whatever they left, they were stupid enough to leave behind. That was looted. And if there was a Rothschild bank, that would have been expropriated. Everything was expropriated. No compensation.
And who benefited from it?
The French state. All that money went to the French state.
And did also, I mean, I think frequently in Germany that this was a spoils system where the people who bought got sweetheart deals.
Yeah, they did get sweetheart deals because this was not sold to the highest bidder.
Right.
You know, and they paid ludicrous prices. And as a matter of fact, a very ugly episode that I so clearly remember. After the German, at the end of the German occupation, when people started trickling back to Paris, either from the free zone where they had been in hiding, or from England, or from, maybe North Africa, wherever they had been. Anybody who trickled back, sometimes from concentration camps, that took months, tried to claim their property. And they were met by stiff resistance, and a group was formed by French, by purchasers of these businesses, who dubbed themselves Association des acheteurs de bonne volonté. Oh no, de bonne foi, I'm sorry. The Association of Buyers in Good Faith, because they had bought these businesses in good faith. You have something similar in the art world when somebody buys a work of art that's actually been stolen from somebody, and they demand compensation because, after all, they bought in good faith, Well, these people did the same thing there, but at that point, someone might claim that they bought a work of art not knowing it was stolen, but it's hardly possible to purchase a Jewish business from someone appointed by the Commissariat aux Questions Juives, not knowing that you're buying somebody's expropriated property, But that led to some very ugly incidents, to the same degree that I did in Poland although in Poland there was actually pogroms when some Jews tried to. This did not happen in Paris, of course, but there were ugly feelings.
Now, what happened to when did this come home in terms of your father and your father's uncles for businesses?
My father's cousins had all more or less withdrawn to the free zone. Rose stayed in Paris, as did Marthe was in Paris for a while, and then she and her husband left.
Now,
Dr. Spreiregen remained in Paris for a while. I don't know what he did after that. Rose's two children were in London, or were in England.
Now, Marthe was the one, she and her husband had the silk. Who had the toy store?
Eleanor. She stayed in Paris. Eleanor, I forget what her married name was. Aunt Rose did wear the Star of David.
Yes.
I don't think Eleanor did.
And they were sisters?
They were sisters. And Rose and Eleanor had lived together with Eleanor's daughter until Rose came to live with us. And after she left, she went back to Eleanor. I never saw my Tante Rose again after 1943. We parted on friendly terms.
We'll come to that in 43.
Mm-hmm.
But your father never thought of going to the free zone.
My brother urged him to go to England.
And he wouldn't?
He wouldn't, because he wouldn't leave us. He couldn't take us, and he wouldn't leave us. And he said, I'm a French citizen, they won't dare touch me.
And you don't remember the date of the denationalization?
No, denaturalization, no. I didn't even know about it. The only way I knew about it is, again, at that exhibit. I saw the decree that denaturalized French citizens of Jewish origin as of a certain date. It might not have affected my father, but I think it did. But so far as I know, Rose was born in Paris. Her siblings were born in Paris. That's a surmise.
But ultimately, that was not any defense either. The French-born Jews as well.
Yes. Oh yes. But what they considered the aliens were the first to go.
Right. And summer of '41, did you take the vacation?
We did. We went to Brittany, to a village near Mantes. It's amazing how one hangs on to certain items, physical objects, and you wonder, how the hell did you hang on to that for any length of time? I had an undeveloped roll of film that dated back to that summer of 1941. And I had it developed after I got to Park Forest.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So 1948?
And it is a very grainy black and white picture. There's my father standing in a group with other people. And then there's a group of girls, 4 girls. And one of them is Dora. Must be. I may be in the group. I don't recognize myself.
Do you still have these photos?
Yes, I do some.
Somewhere?
Yes. But that's the only 2 that came out of that roll. Now, how did I hang on to that? It's like that picture that you mentioned earlier, me with a little sailor hat that dates back to 1932. How I ended up with still having that picture when I walked out of our apartment with nothing. I had taken things out. That's a very long story. It's going to take a week of taping to cover it all because there's a lot to cover. But certain things, it's amazing. You managed to hang on to.
Yeah, we have 19 minutes left on this tape.
Yes.
So you took the vacation in Brittany.
Yes.
And you left in July. You returned at the beginning of September.
Yes, mid-September.
Mid-September. So by now, the Germans, the news from the Eastern Front is not good from the point of view of the good guys. The Germans are going through Russia with enormous.
It's summer of '41. They're still on their. They're still in their victorious phase.
Right. They're
marching and they're still going towards Moscow.
Yeah. It isn't. The winter has not kicked in yet.
No. And the Jews are not forbidden travel at that point, obviously.
Right.
Because there came a time, as per the episode of the bicycle, where we had to turn in our bicycle, we were not allowed to travel, And at that point, none of this had. It took a while for a lot of these things to be promulgated, to be established, to be, carved in stone. And
so
at that point, it was a summer vacation, more or less carefree, Certainly
sad
for us.
Sad without your mother.
Yeah, but at that point, it was almost a year after my mother's death. And being children.
Yeah.
Just,
And
as I said, it was a relatively carefree vacation. We returned home and...
No sign of Germans in Britain?
No. But you see, this was not on the coast. On the coast, we would not have been allowed on the coast. The coastline itself was always, unless you were a resident, you didn't have access to any of these localities. So this was, Le Mans is where the peninsula of Brittany juts out. It's just at the very beginning of well, Brittany becomes differentiated from the rest of France. You know, so it was not really very far out. And no, there were no, I don't. In the country, I don't think that they saw German from one end of the year to the other, except in the demarcation line where they patrolled.
Right. Right. It's so you return to start school in September of 41. October.
I mean, school starts in October.
So you returned. Do you remember anything about the summer of 41? Was it hot? Was it muggy? Was it cool?
It was in the country in July and August it gets hot, but it's like here. It's nothing oppressive, you know. And now I remember I was my father's partner at bridge, and you know. With whom would you play? With other couples that were vacationing at the same place.
Was this were they Jewish, non-Jew?
Non-Jew.
So it was pretty much life was continuing.
Yes.
And so then you returned to Paris. And
at that point, that's where my brother urged my father to go to England, and he wouldn't go. And I suppose he figured that even in order to go to the free zone required logistical means that were not available. Where would we go? What, you know, how would he make a living? Whatever, I don't know. But obviously did not contemplate that. Right. And he suffered under this false sense of security that being a French citizen. He never dreamed that first of all, I don't even think he knew about the denaturalization because he would have told me. And because we discussed things, you know.
It describes that. So would this be over dinner, after dinner?
After dinner. After dinner, maybe not necessarily at dinner. No, my father would discuss things with Nathan or with me. I was a great confidant, and discuss, you know, doing or not doing, what to do. But there was.
Did you discuss the war news? I mean, I was going to ask you. You said that listening to the BBC was forbidden. Or dangerous, and so...
well, the war news were not, at that point, it would have been mostly from Russia. No, we didn't, my father didn't listen to, that I know of, you know, to the BBC at night. Those came, you know, it was during the night that those broadcasts were aired. But I clearly remember in the fall of 41, before he was arrested, that my brother urged him to go. And he wouldn't go. So
so he continues working, and you have your birthday. So you're 15, and you said Nathan's birthday was March 21st. So he was now 16. He was 16 and a half. You were 15. Dora's birthday is December 13th. And she would have been 12. And what happened?
On December 12th came the knock at the door.
What time?
6 a.m. And it was... I have a remembrance of it being a Friday. You know, I used to kid that my sister was born on a Friday the 13th, and she's been bad news ever since. But Thursday was a day off. It was the midweek hiatus for French school children. Never had school on Thursday. So my recollection is that her birthday that year also fell on a Friday the 13th, and that. As I mentioned, I had spent a great part of the night under the covers with a flashlight writing a school report.
Do you remember what it was on?
It might have been a translation from Greek. Whatever. I truly don't remember. when there was a knock at my door, because I did not want to be caught in, doing homework in contraband, so to speak. I had locked the door. All doors have a key. And I had locked the door.
These were heavy, dark wooden doors?
No, they were normal,
normal
doors, but they all had keys. You could lock every door, every bedroom, every room. And there were 2 doors to our bedroom, as I recall. And one door was to the bathroom, and the bathroom also had an opening onto the corridor.
Why don't you describe again, as you did yesterday?
Oh yes, well the apartment had double doors and a long, almost semicircular gallery, because it was very wide. And as you entered, on the right was the door leading to the kitchen. That door was always kept closed. Then the double French doors leading to the salon on one side. On the other side was the double French doors leading to the dining room. There was 2 salons, petit salon and grand salon. And then there was another door that gave access to the inner corridor, which is a narrow hallway, not as large as the gallery. And this lined on both sides with floor to ceiling, and the ceilings are very high. Floor to ceiling, what we call garde-robe, wardrobe, where you hang clothes, or storage up above. And the bedrooms open off this corridor, as well as did our bathroom. And my father came through there and knocked at the door.
Now, when the original knock came, who opened the door?
I don't know if it was a knock or a ring,
Yeah.
My brother, the maid used to come down at 7 o'clock and bring us breakfast in bed. And my brother always was an early riser, rose at 5 to do some study in preparation for this examen des grandes écoles.
When would he have taken that exam? Had things not another year?
Another year.
In another year.
Yes. But you have to remember that these were for the whole of France.
Right.
The competition was stiff on those. There's only one école des ponts et chaussées, only one école polytechnique, only one école normale supérieure.
So it might be that 5,000 or 10,000 candidates for 200 openings?
Yes, but maybe not 10,000, but certainly a large number. And anyway, he'd rise at 5, and he was fully dressed when this knock or ring. And since the maid had not come down yet, he answered the door. And of course, he ushered in, let them come in, a German officer in full uniform and a German soldier, enlisted man, or non-com with a rifle.
No French police?
No. No French police, not at this time. It wasn't until later that it was the French police. In fact, the Grande Rafle, the one that we escaped in 1942, was conducted by the French police. But this was done by the Germans. And my father stood in the doorway there, he was dressed in his robe, pajamas and robe, and he handed me a slip of paper, and he said, "Here, get this for me."
Was it a slip that he had prepared, or was it a slip he'd been given?
He'd been given. It was typewritten.
It was typewritten and said, bring toiletries, bring a change of clothes.
A change of clothes, undergarments. I don't even know. It might even have called for some bedding. I'm not sure. Like sheets, maybe. I don't think so. But whatever it was mostly like the stuff you give for camp.
Right.
For summer camp. And I had to scrounge a suitcase. I wasn't. I had to find out where they were stored, and I put the stuff in there. And in the meantime, my father was getting dressed, and after he got dressed, he took me to one side and told me to go see